We thought that at the beginning of this, just to get you thinking around the inclusion issues, inclusion of people with disabilities, we'd introduce what I call a mental checklist, which is a framework for adapting and modifying activities, sport and activities. It's used across a number of sports. It's been around for a while now, but it's always a good thing to remind ourselves of these things like this. It's a very useful tool for looking at ways to adapt and modify individual activities to suit people's needs. It's used extensively, certainly with people with disabilities, but it's also a tool that can be used across the boards in terms of inclusion. And very quickly, TREE is an acronym. We love our acronyms in sport, and T stands for teaching, coaching style, or method. That's modifying how you coach to suit individual needs. For example, using more manual demonstrations rather than verbal instructions when coaching someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. And of course, there are multiple ways to modify teaching and or coaching style or method. And it's absolutely true that good coaches do all this already. But it is a nice framework, a mental checklist really, to use certainly when faced with an ad hoc situation in particular that will assist you in terms of modifying activities. The second part of this is the R, which is rules and regulations. Now there are, and my panelists and you online would know far better than me all the different rules and regulations in cycling, but rules and regulations can be changed in certain circumstances to suit, and of course many disability sports organisations and paracycling do adapt a lot of rules and regulations so that people with disabilities can participate in those events. And that goes right through from grassroots right through to high performance. Environments as well are very, very important, particularly for some people with disabilities. Assessing the impact of the environment on how someone takes part in cycling. And that could be something like the surface that's being used, the temperature, the brightness, or even the busyness of the activity itself. But how busy that activity is, how much action there is around, can be extremely distracting for some people with disabilities. So being able to think of the environment that you're conducting the activity in and thinking of different ways to modify that environment can make a huge impact without affecting the integrity of the activity for the whole group. So manipulating those environmental constraints is very good. And finally, equipment. Here, when I did a little bit of research looking at adaptive equipment ideas, there were thousands of them for cycling. And I'm sure you can think of them yourselves, and we're going to talk about that during the discussion as well. But looking at the appropriateness of equipment and looking at different ways that can be used can be really beneficial in terms of inclusion. And that goes across the board in different sports. So TREE is a very simple kind of acronym and a mental checklist that can be used to help with the inclusion of people with disability. But there's one thing we've found over the years with the TREE principle, or the TREE framework. It's a very, very good framework to use, particularly for individuals, but in group situations it is possible to over-modify and over-adapt. And you always need to think about the integrity of the activity for the individual and for the group as a whole. So in a group situation, we want to maximize individual potential while retaining the integrity of the activity for the whole group. And that's a key principle of the balancing act. So whether modifying equipment or modifying coaching method, we want to make sure that doesn't affect the integrity for the individual or for the group, particularly in a group situation.